What's up, class? Welcome to Mr. Boyette's Science Basics. In the last video, I mentioned that I would probably be putting up some science videos, and this is from Unit 1, so some of you might have already seen the lesson on this in the book, but I wanted to do a quick PowerPoint for you guys to kind of refresh you on it and also share some additional information. So let's go ahead and talk about this. So this is Unit 1, Life Science, and we're talking about cells. So they're the building blocks of life. All right, so what is a cell? Basically, cells are the building blocks of life, so they're smallest life forms that we know of. And all living things are made up of cells. So we are made up of cells, dogs, cats, any biological organism, plants, are made up of these things called cells. So if an organism is made up of a single cell, it's called single-celled, or it could be multicellular, which means many cells. So anything that we can see, any organism that we can see is a multicellular organism. All right, so there are three types of cells that we need to know about for the GED. And these are your basic typical animal cells, plant cells, and also bacteria. So each has its own distinct differences and some similarities, which we'll go ahead and speak about. All right, so one of the main differences between animal cells and plant cells is that plant cells have this cell wall that protects them and gives the plant structure. So, for example, plants do not have skeletons. So they don't have the ability to stand upright without some sort of structure. And so that's why plant cells have a cell wall. Plant cells also have really large vacuoles. Now, a vacuole is an organelle within a cell that stores water. So, and we've talked about this, how important water is to the process of photosynthesis and so forth. And of course, every living organism needs water to survive, but plants especially so, because not only does, it provide structure for them and, perform a lot of tasks for the plant, but it also plays a role in photosynthesis. So because of that, the plant's vacuole is much larger than it is in any other cell, and that allows them to store water for longer periods of time. For example, humans cannot survive without water in 3 days. Plants can survive much longer than that, even plants that require a lot of water. For example, if we look at plants like cactus and things like that, they have become so good at storing water that they can actually survive for sometimes years without adequate water. So that's pretty amazing. So that's the second difference. And the third main difference is that plant cells contain these things called chloroplasts. And basically these are the organelles that basically facilitate photosynthesis. And as we will learn in the next PowerPoint, that's the cell's way of making energy. So within these chloroplasts, there's also usually this green pigment called chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is what actually kind of absorbs the light and actually makes it possible to facilitate that process of photosynthesis. All right, now something that isn't talked a lot about, but might still be on the GED, are bacteria cells. So bacteria is very interesting because it's one of the most ancient forms of life, of microscopic life that there is. And because of that, it's actually much less developed than both plant and animal cells. So it's a little more primitive in that sense. And the reason for this has to do with some of the differences. So the first thing that you will notice if you look at a diagram of a bacteria is that they have no nuclear membrane, which means that the nucleus itself and the DNA contained within it is not protected. That was a development that was made later by animal and plant cells in order to protect their genetic information from attack and things like that. Bacteria don't have this. They also have no bound organelles. So instead of having, a mitochondria with a membrane, or a chloroplast with a membrane, everything just floats kind of freely within the bacteria. So these organelles float freely within the cytoplasm, and there's basically nothing containing them. And for movement, bacteria use these little tentacle-like things called pili and flagella to kind of move around. So those are the basic differences between bacteria cells and regular plant and animal cells. So they're a little funky, they're a little weird, but it makes sense if you think about the role that bacteria plays. Again, bacteria rarely, and again, not 100% sure on this, but it rarely forms multicellular organisms. So it doesn't really have the same ability to do so as plant and animal cells. So you'll never see, a huge organism made up of bacteria because, it doesn't have the same level of protection. It operates better as a single-celled organism. Now, a common misconception about bacteria is that all of it is bad. And actually, that's not true. A lot of it is actually good bacteria. And for example, when you eat yogurt, that thing in yogurt that they talk about that's good for you, probiotics, those are actually bacteria. So there's a lot of bacteria within your body that actually helps you with certain things. So not all of it's bad, although you want to be careful because some of it is very bad and will make you sick. Alrighty. So a couple things to know for the GED science test. So you need to know what a cell is and why it's important. Okay, so we talked a little bit about that. You need to know the different organelles and their functions. So this can be, you can see this in any basically online website, what each organelle does, and you basically just briefly know what it does, the function of it, and that's it, because you might need to answer a question related to that on the GED. You'll also need to know the differences between plant and animal cells. So sometimes they'll ask you, what the main difference is, or they'll have a question that says, which one of these statements is true of animal cells but not of plant cells? So you're going to need to know both of them. And lastly, even though I haven't seen much of this on the GED, it is something that could be covered, and that is the defining features of a bacteria cell. So if they ask you something like what makes a bacteria cell different from plant or animal cells, you'll need to know that. So you'll need to know, for example, they have no bound organelles, they have no nuclear membrane, etc. So those are some of the things that you'll need to know for the GED science test, and I believe that brings us to the end of our presentation. So I will see you guys in the next lesson, which is photosynthesis, and I will catch you in the next video.